Good evening, everyone, and welcome to COS at Home. I am your host, Jonathan Viaud, and thank you for joining us for another exciting program this evening. Tonight, we have some really exciting developments to share with you during our COS Now segment. You're going to want to check out and listen to some of the things that we've got to share with you. We also have an important and super easy action that you can take right now to help us advance our mission. For our interview segment of the program, we are excited to be welcoming back to the program the president of Wall Builders and a strong Convention of States supporter, Tim Barton. Unfortunately, we had to pre-record the conversation with Tim to accommodate his schedule. I believe he was in Arkansas today testifying on some important legislation, which you'll hear about during the interview. But trust me, you are not going to want to miss this conversation with Tim Barton. It is a masterclass, and you will really, really enjoy it. So be sure to stick around for the entire interview. So for any one of you that are new to the program, new to Convention of States, I want to take a minute to say welcome. Thank you so much for joining us and being here. If you're wondering what is Convention of States exactly, you're not 100% sure. Well, we are a grassroots movement focused on the goal of utilizing Article 5 of the U.S. Constitution to call a convention for proposing amendments to the Constitution that would reduce the size and scope of the federal government, impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, and place term limits on all members of Congress and federal officials. Just under those three subject areas is what our convention would be talking about. In order to hold this convention, we need 34 states to pass our resolution, and so far we have 19 states that have done so. So that is our goal, but what is our mission at Convention of States? Well, we have a saying around here that it is more than a convention. Our mission is to build the largest engaged army of self-governing grassroots in American history, or the way I put it, to reestablish a culture of self-governance. Our founders built a system of governance that was dependent on an active and educated citizenry. Sadly, we Americans have allowed the comfort and distractions of everyday life to prevent us from doing our duty. Convention of States is focused on changing that and reigniting the fire of liberty in every American citizen, and we hope that you will join us. All right, and one other thing before we get the full program started here, I want to mention our friends over at Article 5 Outfitters. They've got some more great content and great things for your favorite Patriot. Some new shirts that are up there. We've got this great American Patriot shirt. One that we're also really excited to be sharing is the Income Robbery Service t-shirt, as well as the Spilling the Tea t-shirt. As you can imagine, spilling the tea, we're thinking of the Boston Tea Party there. I'll be honest though, as much as a red-blooded American as I am, I do love my tea, so forgive me. But the Income Robbery Service is also a fun one. The IRS, that's all they're doing these days, is robbing you and I of our hard-earned money. Why do we even have that part of our government, right? So lots of great things over there. What else do we have there, Producer G? Those great new t-shirts and some other things that are available. So you want to check this out. You want to go to Article 5 Outfitters. There's plenty of other things available as well. Pocket guides, stickers, lots of fun things. So sure, go on over to Article 5 Outfitters, shop for your favorite Patriot. There's also going to be a ton of great things that are going to be added there. They add things, great new things every day. So thank you for sharing that, Producer G. Now, let's go ahead and get started with 5 for 5. All right, tonight for 5 for 5, we have a helpful video from Rita Peters, our Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs, where she provides more information about something we've discussed on the program before, one of my favorite things with Convention of States, and I'll explain why in a minute. It's when we support legislation that we refer to as F3. So let's turn it over to Rita.
At Convention of States Action, our mission is to restore a culture of self-governance in America. That means we, the people, taking responsibility for our communities and states, rather than letting government run our lives. We believe this will produce a more vibrant America, a nation free to flourish. Self-governance is more than a convention. That's why our state teams support legislation outside of our model application for an Article 5 convention. We call it F3 legislation. When approved by the national COS legal and legislative teams, the state teams can use COS resources to support or oppose legislation which affects federalism, freedom, and fundamental rights. COS teams have already helped their states successfully pass legislation on topics such as parental rights or election integrity. We believe citizens have far more influence in their local community and their state than they ever will over DC. However, F3 is also an opportunity to impact elected officials who eventually become involved in national politics. Those who serve in federal positions almost always start out in local or state politics. F3 encompasses the process by which our national and state COS teams can engage in local and state politics to protect our way of life. By getting engaged in local and state politics in strategic ways, we can restore a culture of self-governance in America from the bottom up. To learn more, please visit conventionofstates.com/F3.
Thank you, Rita, for that explanation. And I think that's exactly a perfect example of what I was referring to earlier when I say we're more than a convention. Yes, we want to get to convention. Our grassroots are advocating for our COS resolution in order to make that a reality. But there are states in certain situations, particularly states that have already passed the resolution, where we're looking to continue to grow our grassroots muscle, continue to spread that culture of self-governance and start within our own states. And that is where F3 legislation comes in. And we're going to be talking about that a lot more when we talk with Tim Barton here in just a few minutes. So thank you again, Rita, for taking the time to share that with us. Okay, let's hear about the latest COS news from across the country. And to do that, I will now turn it over to Rachel Martin with COS Now.
Coming up on COS Now, Texas held a hearing on staying in the movement, Indiana passed 34 ready, and Hawaii volunteers are setting a new petition record. Plus, Rick Santorum rallied supporters, and COS released a new short film on South Carolina's journey. All that and more on COS Now.
What do we want? When do we want it? Now!
Hey everybody, I'm your host Rachel Martin, and you're watching COS Now, the show where we talk about all the latest news in the Convention of States movement. Be sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring that notification bell so that you never miss any upcoming content that we have for you guys. Last Wednesday, the Texas House State Affairs Committee held a public hearing on HJR 98, which would help Texas in the Convention of States movement going forward. Here's Texas State Representative Cody Vasut giving a closing statement.
No amount of litigation from Texas or standing under the 10th Amendment is ever going to force Congress to balance their budget. There is no term limit amendment in the Constitution. The Founding Fathers explicitly put into the Constitution a mechanism by which the states can rein in the federal government. That provision is in Article 5. And all HJR 98 does is exercises Texas's power under that provision to rein in the federal government, directly in line with what our founding fathers intended.
The committee is expected to vote on the resolution at a later date. Earlier on Wednesday, the New Hampshire House of Representatives was scheduled to debate Convention of States. Unfortunately, the House inexplicably voted to table a dozen more bills and resolutions without any real debate, and that included the COS resolution. We want to give kudos to the COS New Hampshire volunteers for getting the bill this far and wish them well in 2026. And now it's time to move on to the final 5 highlights. Last Monday, the Indiana legislature passed 34 ready, the first state to successfully adopt our model application for instructing commissioners to an Article 5 convention. Less than 24 hours after the Hawaii legislature held a public hearing on Convention of States, the Hawaii team was back at work at a local gun show. They recruited an astounding 356 new petition signers, a single event record for Team Hawaii. Last week, Senator Rick Santorum headlined COS Capitol Day events, otherwise known as Surge Days, in Pennsylvania and North Carolina. Meanwhile, the Georgia and Oregon team reported their recent Surge Days on the COS website. COS supporters are encouraged to attend upcoming surge days at their state capitals, including April 2nd in California at 9 a.m. local time and April 7th in Nevada at noon local time. On Saturday, COS released the third short film in the Story of series produced by Jake Fay. This episode focused on the incredible story of perseverance behind South Carolina's journey to join the Article 5 movement.
For nearly a decade, the Grassroots aimed for ubiquity. Our volunteer political operatives were inescapable, exerting tremendous grassroots pressure on legislators wherever they went.
You can watch the full film on Convention of States YouTube or Rumble. And that's all for this week's recap. Be sure to check us out on other social media platforms, leave your thoughts in the comments down below, and I'll see you same time next week here on COS Now.
Thank you so much, Rachel, for all of that, and lots of exciting things going on across the country. And I also want to just take a minute to echo what Rachel talked about. If you have not done so already, we highly recommend that you join our COS teams at their Capitol Surge events. Those are great ways for you to meet your legislator, educate them on Convention of States, and just get involved with your team as well. So really, really want to emphasize that you do that. Now, I mentioned at the top of the program that there were some exciting developments that have happened since we recorded the last COS Now, and I want to share with you. First and foremost, we have victory on Monday in Montana House Committee on Business and Labor. HJR 5 was sent to the Montana House for consideration by a vote of 11-9. That's a big deal. Earlier in session, they had voted to, voted it down actually in committee. Then it was tabled. We were able to work the committee members there. It came back up for a vote, and we passed 11-9. It's now going to a vote, and it's likely going to be tomorrow on the floor. Now, stick around to the action at home to learn exactly how you can help help us score a victory in Montana. There's some things that we're working on that we could use your help with, and you can have a major impact on what goes on there. I also want to mention that if you are one of our grassroots activists, make sure you check your email, except if you live in Texas, Ohio, and Iowa. Right now, y'all are focused on important things going on in your own state. One of you I'm going to be mentioning something about in just a minute. But for the rest of you, if you are activists and you're assigned a role with Convention of States, we have a nationwide call to action that we sent to you that you can jump in there and contact some of these legislators. So please take a look at that call to action and please respond and reach out and help us in contacting folks there in Montana to advance our resolution. Also, I wanted to share that we had some big news today out of the Lone Star State. Earlier this morning, the Texas House State Affairs Committee brought up HJR 98 and passed it by a vote of 8-5. We are extremely excited about that. It is now going to be sent to the Calendars Committee, and once it gets through calendars, it will hit the House floor. Just a tremendous, tremendous job by our grassroots activists there in Texas. They have constantly showed up in the Capitol. I have been working alongside them, and I could not be prouder of all of our activists there. So huge kudos to our state leadership team, our Capitol Brigade, all of our activists and supporters there. And if you're in Texas and you haven't signed our petition, please go on and sign the petition. We need your help. We're going to be contacting you to help us in advancing this through the rest of the legislature, and we need you. There have been so many of you that have responded to our calls to action already. We have over 800 probably 900 messages that have been generated and sent to legislators this legislative session by Texans, 2 Texas legislators. Thank you for responding and doing that. We're going to ask you to do some more coming up. So please make sure that you are connected with our Texas team. All right. Next up is our interview segment of the program featuring Wall Builders President Tim Barton. Now we have the great pleasure of welcoming back to the program the president of Wall Builders and dear friend to Convention of States, Tim Barton. Tim, how are you doing, sir?
I'm well. How are you?
Doing great. And it is really great to have you back with us on COS at Home. You know, I looked, and the last time you joined us was back in July of 2022. I was actually in my car because we were up in Vermont. It's a long story, but it's nice to be in my home and talking with you here, and much better backdrop for everyone. But I was watching that to prepare for this interview and wanted to jog my memory about some of the things that we discussed back then. And I just was taken aback at how different the world feels, even though it's only been 3 years since we've spoken. And I think a lot of that comes down to the return of President Donald Trump to the White House. Now, there are a number of specific news items I want to discuss with you about President Trump's administration, but and particularly as it relates to the Department of Education. But let's take it the 30,000-foot view look at this. If you would, share with us your thoughts for the first few months of the second iteration of the Trump White House.
Yeah, I think overall it's very, very optimistic, which is probably what most people would say, right? When we look at all the things that he's doing, first of all, beyond executive orders, we'll come back to that in a second. When you look at the cabinet picks, when you look at who he surrounded himself with, he learned a lot his first term. And looking back, obviously, hindsight, you have the opportunity to see much more clearly than sometimes in the moment, not seeing how things will play out and having all that perspective. And had President Trump won in 2020, I think a lot of things are true that he might not have known how corrupt some of these three-letter agencies have been, the DOJ, because he was targeted, right? When literally the judicial system came after him, they wanted to imprison him, they wanted to keep him from running, et cetera, et cetera. He saw all these frivolous lawsuits that were coming up. He had to navigate and deal with that. He saw people that were supportive of him, those that maybe weren't as supportive of him. There was a lot of lessons he learned. On top of the fact, had he won in 2020, he wouldn't have had a favorable Senate with the several extra votes he needs above 50. And granted, in the Senate, the way the founding father set it up is there's some things that it requires 2/3 to be able to get done. Actually, at times you need 3/5. If you are going to get cloture on something, if somebody has a filibuster and you need to stop it, you have to have 3/5. So you have to have 60 senators. There's some challenges he still is navigating. But the fact that now he has more than 50 Republican senators that are favorable to help get through some of those appointments, which only require 50 votes plus one, there's a lot of really positive things. And then the cabinet he surrounded himself with, there's no way in his first term he would have chosen some of these people, but now he's chosen the Marco Rubio for Secretary of State, the Pete Hegseth to be over the Pentagon and navigate with the military. So many disruptors, because he's recognized how much we need to change the structure and system. I think it's also the reason he chose a guy like RFK Jr. I think we all understand they have some significantly diametrically opposed positions on certain topics, which is why even at some of the early rallies when he was telling them, you can't touch the oil, we're going to leave that alone. He knows they have very different ideologies of certain topics, and yet recognizing that this could be one of the best guys to oversee some of the health concerns, the NIH, FDA, et cetera, having a voice to some of these things. He's choosing very different people than he chose his first term. And then on top of it, he's now doing the executive orders. And some of that is very strategic because he recognizes many things that happened in America happened under executive orders that were done by President Joe Biden. So some of his executive orders are just undoing what Joe Biden did. But then he recognizes he has executive power over some of these agencies. And so we're going to do some things differently, even bringing in DOJ. We could spend the entire time talking about just some of what he's done. But strategically, he has taken moves to do what he can that he did not need congressional help or support for by and large. Now, he had to have approval in the Senate to get some of these nominees in place. But beyond that, he's doing what he can do independently. One of the things that we recognize the challenge, it's actually one of the things that obviously Convention of States, y'all have been talking about promoting so well, is if we don't get some things done legislatively or even constitutionally, you're going to be able to have a next president come in and undo a lot of these things that are very valuable, good things. And I think he recognizes that. And so he's really encouraged Congress in some areas. They've not been able to go as far as they need to. There's been some criticism of Mike Johnson as the speaker, that he's not a conservative enough leader. I don't really see it that way. I think he's actually the most conservative Speaker of the House we've had in any of our lifetimes. Maybe Newt Gingrich, right? Actually, caveat. Newt Gingrich might be more conservative in some areas, but Newt wasn't more pro-life than Mike Johnson was. He's not better on some traditional American values, I don't think, than Mike Johnson is. The difference was Newt Gingrich had a super majority of Republicans. And so he didn't have to worry about some very moderate liberal Republicans keeping them in line to be able to show what looks like a coalesced front, a unified front. The Republican Party is not unified in a lot of areas. And this is a challenge Mike has. It's a little bit like trying to herd and wrangle cats, that he has a very, very thin majority of the House. And if he takes steps too quickly in a conservative direction, he's going to lose some of those moderate Democrats. And then we're not going to be able to, number one, show a unified front, but number two, get things done. And so I think he's navigating and juggling a lot. And this is also why that as good as what President Trump is actually accomplishing, it's going to be limited in scope to how far it actually can go. And I think he's going to need some help in the midterm election to actually be able to get some of these things done legislatively, which he ultimately will need to make sure these can't just be undone by the next president. So we can spend a lot of time going different directions. I would say that's kind of, in my mind, big picture overview of some of what's there. And again, we could spend so much time on so many of these topics, but overall, he gets an A+ for what he's doing. But he's only going to be able to get so much more done because it's limited in scope for the presidential powers, the jurisdiction he has. At some point, he's going to need Congress, and we can even get into some of these judges that are overreaching and what they're doing. But overall, President Trump, I give him an A+ for what he's doing up to this point.
Yeah, there's so much in there that I agree with and so much that I would love to explore further. But first, let me just say I totally agree with you that if President Trump had won the 2020 election, and when we say won, I know that there are still some questions about the accuracy of that election, and we won't go into that right now. But had he been reelected at that point to have his second term, I don't think we would have seen the things that we have seen so far, particularly as you mentioned, as it relates to cabinet members. And we, Convention of States, are extremely excited about it because there are so many in his cabinet that are true Convention of States supporters. You mentioned Marco Rubio, an endorser of Convention of States, Pete Hegseth, endorser, Caroline Leavitt, endorser, J.D. Vance, a supporter. So there are a lot, and we're really excited about it. But I also think what you just said there right at the end about the need to have Congress come alongside and make some of these things permanent, I think ultimately they're not going to. And so that's where Convention of States comes in. We can help accomplish the things for President Trump or the vision that he is casting without necessarily relying on Congress because of the challenge that it is, particularly as it relates to something like the Department of Education. And I think it's a great segue into my question about this. He's effectively abolished the Department of Education. And I say effectively because he cannot abolish it entirely without Congress. But through executive action, he's currently dismantling it. As the president of an organization such as Wall Builders that has been working to re-educate citizens across the country on our nation's history and bring about a greater appreciation for America's forgotten heroes, surely you must be absolutely devastated to see such a fine institution that our founders created in, let me check here, Article 8 of the Constitution to be destroyed by this administration, right? So any day the sky is going to be falling. Is that correct, Tim?
Yeah, as also a Bible scholar, this is what we find in second hesitations. The biblical guidelines for Department of Education. Like, no, clearly there's no Article 8 of the Constitution. There's no second hesitations in the Bible. I mean, the idea that people are promoting, well, if we don't have a Department of Education, then our kids won't have any school. Like, this is some of the dumbest positioning there could possibly be. And really, it does speak to how bad the Department of Education has been, that we know so little when it comes to even its origin, when it comes to American history. And looking at the Department of Education, just as a quick review for us to remember the context of this, it was 1979 that Carter says we need a Department of Education. And part of the reason is under the Department of Education, the initial goals for it was maybe to help America do better educationally and academically. Well, if you look at what we've done performance-wise since 1971, academically, educationally, all we've done is nosedive. I mean, study the Department of Education's own data. In 2015, they came out with a report, and I'm saying 2015 because this is when they released a study. They have not updated it, almost as if they don't want us to know the current standing, I think it's gotten worse. But in 2015, they identified there were currently 19% of high school graduates graduating every single year who were functionally illiterate, who could not read or write well enough to get or maintain a job. In fact, they could not even read their own diplomas. That's 19% of high school graduates. And when you think about the fact they've been in school from kindergarten up through 12th grade, and how many tens of thousands at that point, I mean, $100,000+ has been spent on their education, and you've spent that much money and they can't even read or write well enough to get a job where they might have to read something, or where they have to interact with people, have some basic academic acumen. This is a major problem. And on top of it, the Constitution actually, in largely Article 1, Section 8, it gives the listing of enumerated powers of what the government can do. Now, it's not only in Article 1, Section 8, but that's where the majority of them are. But the Constitution says, here's what the federal government can do. And it goes through and it lists all of those enumerated powers. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution is part of the Bill of Rights. It says whatever's not explicitly given to the federal government belongs to the states. Well, you can go up and down the Constitution and you will not find education of children being given to the federal government. What does that mean? It means it's not something the federal government has any constitutional authority or oversight for. It belongs to the states. So what President Trump is doing is actually supporting the Constitution, saying that education really belongs to states. It should go back to the states. And this is absolutely true from a constitutional standpoint. So the Department of Education was never constitutional to begin with, number one. Number two, if the reason you exist is to help students do academically better, all you've done is fail for more than 40 years. Well, then just from a practical standpoint, you should be closed down because you're the worst that there's ever been at this job. So it's not constitutional. It is a failure. And this idea of returning and restoring it back to the state level is phenomenal. We could also add to the fact that if you look at the makeup of most public school districts, of most independent school districts, in Texas, for example, the average of administration to teaching staff is 1-to-1, sometimes 1.2, 1.3, sometimes even 2-to-1, administrative staff to teachers. Well, why is there so much administrative staff? A lot of times it's to fill out all the paperwork. It's to do all of the requests and the taxes and the filing. It's all of the things associated with taking federal dollars. And if we think very practically about the payment process, where do we think the scale is? Like in public schools, who probably makes the least amount of money? Some kind of teacher. Who makes the most amount of money? Some kind of administrator, right? Administrators make more than teachers in the classroom. Now that's a given. That shouldn't be complicated. It shouldn't even be controversial. And when you have more administrators than you do have teachers, then you're bloating a bureaucracy. You're paying a bureaucracy. And so even this idea of in schools where we often hear, well, teachers should make more money. Yeah, guess why they don't make more money? Because when more money comes to district, guess who gets the biggest raises? The administrative staff, not the teachers. It's not that school districts don't have enough money in most situations, or basically all situations. It's that the money is going to the administrative side, not to the classroom side. In Texas, for example, several years ago, there was a piece of legislation introduced to make sure that 70% of all education funds are spent inside the classroom. And guess who opposed it? The reason it wasn't passed is because teachers and teachers unions opposed it. Now, why in the world would teachers oppose it? They were told this is really bad for education. Now, they probably didn't know why it was really bad for education. It's because it would reduce how much administrative staff there could be, how many dollars could be spent on administrative staff. It was to reduce the bloated bureaucracy of public schools. Again, this is all a result of the Department of Education, where the federal government says, we're going to give you funds, but we need to make sure there's people in place that can enforce our DEI policies, that can enforce our critical race theory policies, that can, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is what's been going on. And it doesn't mean that there haven't been good people that have been part of the system. It doesn't mean that there haven't been good things that were done part of the system. But this is a little bit like arguing when we say there's good public school teachers in the public school system. And by the way, I'm very much in favor of alternative education systems, recognizing how broken the public school system is. And it's not because, again, it's not because every teacher there is bad. No, I have family members who are public school teachers, who have been public school administrators, and I would totally trust my kids to be in their classes. I do. Now, it doesn't mean I trust everybody in their school. I recognize the majority of public school teachers have a very different worldview and ideology than I do, and I would not feel comfortable with them imparting their worldview and ideology to my kids. But here's the reason. Again, I want to kind of big picture thought this. Is the Department of Education is the one that's been upholding and enforcing so many standards that have been carried out in the public school system. And the argument is, but there's been good things that have been done from it too. It's a little bit like arguing that, well, you know, the band on the Titanic was really good. And so like we wouldn't want to cancel the Titanic because, right, we'd lose this really good band. Here's the reality. The Titanic, it's going down. The public education system under the Department of Education, it's an incredibly broken system. What President Trump has said, he's totally correct. We need to dismantle this thing. It's not successful. It's not working. We shouldn't keep doing what's not working, right? That's part of the definition of insanity, is doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. You don't double down on stupid when it's going the wrong direction. You say, hey, let's do something different. So I am totally in favor of what he's doing. I rejoice what's happening. There's still a lot of things yet to be decided. We know that there are senators and congressmen who are working to introduce measures to abolish the Department of Education. I think it's going to be a major uphill battle. But the fact that President Trump is already dismantling it, where legislatively speaking, there were several laws that were passed saying that there were certain things that needed to be done, but you don't have to have a Department of Education to do those basic things. So again, President Trump, in his brilliance, and some of the people he surrounded himself with have given him very good advice on these situations. So there is a lot of positive things happening. There's a good thing when schools are being returned, when school districts have more local control, they have more autonomy. It also brings more accountability. One of the things that we all should be very concerned about is parental rights. Parents should have a say in their kids' education. But when you have a Department of Education and the local school district says, guys, right, it's not our fault, it's somebody in Washington, D.C., it actually minimizes parents' ability. It kind of neuters them in some ways that they don't have the opportunity and ability to have the voice they need. And what President Trump is trying to do is return and restore parental guidelines, parental control, local accountability, which is the way education really should be.
That is so well said, sir. And you know, as I was sitting there and listening to you and talk about all of the failures of the Department of Education, I think one of the biggest areas, and this is why we love organizations like Wall Builders so much, is that we have lost our appreciation for our history. We have lost the understanding of our constitutional system, and it's having real-time effects within our world. And I think you mentioned it earlier, none currently in the news or more glaring than what has been going on with the district court judges and the injunctions that they have been issuing on President Trump. I think that they need to probably have a little bit more of an understanding of our constitutional system, but that's exactly the question that I want to ask you. So just to set the scene for folks here, I was reading last night, in February alone, judges issued 15 nationwide injunctions against the Trump administration, which is more than the total number of injunctions faced by President Bush, President Obama, and President Biden throughout the entirety of their presidencies. Now, taking a step back and ignoring the political aspect of these injunctions, as an expert on the Constitution and some of the heroes of our founding era, was this how the founders believed our judicial system should operate? And if not, how was it supposed to function?
Yeah, I mean, clearly it's not. This is actually what led to, for example, Samuel Chase facing impeachment, because he was doing things that were viewed very politically. He was making decisions not based maybe on what the Constitution says, but based on a political perspective. It led to him being impeached. Now, he was not removed because in the impeachment process, right, that the House files articles of impeachment, the Senate has the trial. We've learned a lot more about that, but it's also worth noting the Constitution deals with the topic of impeachment more than virtually any other topic. And when you look at the idea of impeachment, most people are far more familiar with a president being impeached. And yet the Constitution doesn't limit impeachment to presidents. It actually does it for all political positions. And it actually identifies even judges. So this is not something the founding fathers hadn't considered. It's not a brand new thought or idea. And there's a lot of things in the modern era that we've misunderstood and misrepresented. One of the things, and we could even link this to Department of Education and our very bad educational system that we have heard over and over and over again, is, well, there are 3 co-equal branches. Well, that's not correct constitutionally. It's not correct historically at all. An easy example is go to the Federalist Papers. The Federalist Papers were done by James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay, all 3 noted scholars when it comes to understanding and interpreting the Constitution. And as you break down the Federalist Papers, when they identify that the legislative branch necessarily predominates, it is the most powerful of all 3 branches. And then in a Federalist paper, they identify that the judicial system is beyond comparison the weakest of the 3 branches. So if you have one that's the strongest and you have one that's the weakest, those are not co-equal. Also, when you look at the Constitution, there are 7 articles in the Constitution. Which article is the largest? Article 1. Well, what does Article 1 deal with? The legislative branch. Well, guess who has the most constitutional authority identified and outlined in the Constitution? The legislative branch. Well, guess what is the second largest article in the Constitution? Article 2. Well, what does that deal with? That deals with the the executive department. And as you are going through the executive branch, identifying what they're supposed to do, well, guess who the Constitution gives the second most constitutional authority to? That is the executive branch. And then the third most is the judicial. Well, they're literally ranked. You actually can just see the size and scope of the very words, the sections of the Constitution. Article 1's the largest, then Article 2, then Article 3. Well, that's legislative, executive, and judicial. They even identify and lay this out in the Constitution, and then they clarify in the Federalist Papers. You see it in their writings over and over again. If you go back to the Declaration of Independence, where they explain the reason we're separating from Great Britain, one of the things they identified, actually in multiple of these grievances of the Declaration, was judicial overreach. There are multiple examples where they list judges as one of the reasons we are separating. Why? Because there wasn't accountability for judges. Now, that matters because if one of their problems is there's no judicial accountability, then what they did in the Constitution was they worked to resolve all of those problems. And so giving judicial accountability, saying, hey, they're the weakest. In fact, if you read the Constitution, go back and review it, it actually outlines that Congress can even determine what topics the judges are allowed to deal with. And people would go, wait a second, that doesn't, no, literally, go read the Constitution. The Constitution setting up a judicial system, there has to be a Supreme Court. But then every lower court under that, the lower courts can be decided by Congress. They can be removed by Congress, and Congress can determine the jurisdiction over what issues they can cover. So if Congress said, yeah, we're not going to let you deal with this topic anymore, they could totally remove that. This is part of the checks and balances of what we have seen. Obviously, why Convention of States exists and promotes so much of the idea that we need to go back to the people to restore some of the constitutional parameters and values is because we have seen Congress willingly, in many situations, give up their power and say, we can't do anything. You actually literally can do this. You actually, Congress have the power to say, we're removing that court where that judge is. We're going to abolish that jurisdiction of that judge. And then, by the way, the next day, they could come back and restore it. And they could then open a spot where now whoever the sitting president is gets to appoint a judge for that bench. Like literally, this is the way it can work. But you have to have people that read and know and understand the Constitution. Then you have to have people that have the backbone willing to do it. But this is also why there was a separation of powers. It's why there was checks and balances set up in this. Founding fathers understood that the heart of man ultimately was deceitful and wicked, is the way they explained it. And therefore, we needed checks and balances because we know at times people might do a bad thing. And we want there to be accountability mechanisms in place that we can hold somebody accountable, whether it's an impeachment, whether it's Congress authorizing jurisdiction, closing down courts. There's going to be ways this can happen. Because we don't know the Constitution, because we don't understand even history, we're looking at this happen going, well, I mean, if a judge said it, I guess President Trump can't do anything about it. And I would even point back to Andrew Jackson. Now, I think Andrew Jackson was incredibly wrong for doing this when he was violating so many of the federal Indian treaties. And then he works unilaterally to do Indian relocation of these native tribes. there actually were two cases brought before the U.S. Supreme Court. I think John Quincy Adams, who had been president before, he was now back in Congress, but he was a noted attorney. I think he's actually he was the lead attorney on one of those two cases going before the U.S. Supreme Court, where he pointed out Andrew Jackson can't just willfully and voluntarily unilaterally violate these treaties, saying, yeah, we're not going to do that anymore. I'm going to go ahead and relocate these native tribes. And the Supreme Court ruled correctly and said, no, he is violating the Constitution with these treaties, federal law. He cannot do that. And kind of the famous line that is attributed to Andrew Jackson, there's not a specific quote where he said this. It's definitely revealed in his behavior, his actions, but this was attributed to him, that the Supreme Court has made their decision. Let's see them now try to enforce it. Why does that matter? Because the president's literally the one who's over the military. It's his job to enforce the laws. And I think on some level, we've seen this a little bit from President Trump with some of these judicial decisions, some of what they've said, where he's essentially said, yeah, you can try to enforce that. Now, he hasn't said it that explicitly, but this is literally one of the things that he could work to do. And of course, the media would spin this up, that he's a tyrant. See, this is him being Hitler. He's not going to be accountable. But it's the reality of there's checks and balances. And because so few Americans know the Constitution, they've ever read the Federalist Papers, understand American history, we only know what we've been taught generally in our lifetime, what's been the precedent for the last several decades. And if you go back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, you had the Supreme Court setting precedent, where even the Supreme Court now will say that we are the ones who determine constitutionality. Okay, show me in the Constitution where the U.S. Supreme Court are the sole arbiters, the sole determiners of what's constitutionality. Like, why can't Congress say something is constitutional or not? Why can't the president say something is constitutional or not? Because if even by your own Supreme Court, by your own argument, if there's three co-equal branches, well, if you're all three equal, then you all three can equally decide what's constitutional. So then who are you to say that what President Trump is doing is unconstitutional if we're co-equal, but you're acting like you're superior, which means we're not equal, which is inconsistent and contradictory to your very own position, right? And this is their reality, is what they're promoting is very intellectually inconsistent, and it's historically inaccurate, and it's unconstitutional. So I think there's several options President Trump has. The problem is the American people are far too ignorant to recognize what the Constitution actually says. So whatever President Trump and his team do, they're going to have to do some educational initiatives and efforts along the way to help the American people understand the role of the judiciary, the role of the executive, the role of the legislative, and what power the president actually does have, because he really does have the power to do these things. And these judges are out of control. The idea of impeachment is not far-fetched, contrary to what Chief Justice Roberts says, where that's an extreme example. No, it's not. This is absolutely in line. Judges are only there, according to the Constitution, for the duration of good behavior. Well, for them to do things that are unconstitutional, that is bad behavior, and they should be impeached for those bad behavior decisions they are making. If you're being unconstitutional, that's clearly bad behavior from a judicial perspective, from the judiciary. And if you don't know what the Constitution says, you probably shouldn't have that position.
And I think, it's fascinating. As I was preparing these questions, I wasn't necessarily thinking along these lines, but listening to you answer both of the conversation about the Department of Education and what's been going on with the lawlessness from these judges, it shows that they're connected, right? And what we're seeing is it's a crisis of not only a constitutional crisis with it respects to what the judges are actually doing, but it's a crisis in our nation of a lack of understanding of what our process is within all of this and what our role is as the American people, as the citizens, right? And at the very beginning of the Constitution, which I have hanging up on my wall, it says, "We the people," right? And so we need to understand the document that we are in charge of, right? We were the ones left with the power. And if we aren't paying attention, if we aren't educated on this, that is how this lawlessness, it takes place. And then lawlessness begets lawlessness, and we have a major issue. And so what I love about your organization and what we've been doing with Convention of States is we are going out there and we are demonstrating that there are ways that we can fix this. So earlier in the program, I shared with our audience that for some states, Convention of States supports our teams in advocating for what we call F3 legislation. This is legislation that promotes freedom, federalism, and fundamental rights. Many of the F3 bills that we have supported focus primarily on education. Our Florida team supported HB1, which was a universal school choice bill that was adopted by our legislature 2 years ago. In Oklahoma, we helped pass HB 2030 back in 2021, which established that high school students must pass a civics test on par with the naturalization exam that prospective citizens must pass. And earlier this year, our Georgia team was supporting House Bill 133, which would allow public school students to voluntarily leave school during school hours to attend religious instruction, which is legal. It is something that the Supreme Court has said can be done. So I mention all of this, Tim, because between what we've been doing and what you and David Barton have been doing, you've been traveling around the country, focusing on legislation regarding civics education and bringing the 10 Commandments back into the classroom. I think what we are accomplishing, or what we're demonstrating, is that the states are capable of handling these important functions, such as education, within the states. And so I think if we can demonstrate that the states are capable of handling this power, there's a lot more power that we can take away from the federal government that the states can handle. But let me back up. Tell us a little bit more about the legislation that you have been supporting. Why is Wall Builders behind this? You know, what does Wall Builders exactly do? Why are they going out there and traveling the country, you and David Barton traveling the country to push this type of legislation? What is this all about?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally what we are doing is we're trying to teach, even in legislatures, in these committee, some of the history and tradition of our nation. So we go in as experts of American history that we have studied and know this stuff pretty well, especially on the moral and religious side. And so things like, for example, the civics education bill, when this was one they're doing in Arkansas right now, it actually made it to the House and Senate committees. It's going to be voted on. I think probably it's going to be signed into law by Governor Sanders up in Arkansas. Really good piece of legislation. And all it is reaffirming is that students should actually, in the midst of them maybe learning the base things about the Declaration, Constitution, Bill of Rights, they probably should learn some big picture ideas too. Like, where did the founding fathers come up with the ideas that they used in framing these documents? And so going back and understanding, well, who is John Locke and what was he promoting? Life, liberty, property, and William Blackstone. The idea that there's a laws of nature and nature's God and these inalienable rights. And Blackstone explains this in great depth and detail. And this idea for the founding fathers to believe that there was a God who gave us rights and government exists to protect those rights. And so we're able to go in and show from the historic standpoint, the framework of what was going on. And so this is for civics education. And we kind of start with Locke and Blackstone and Montesquieu and come all the way through the founders' writings to give context, because a lot of times when students are told read the Declaration, read the Constitution, you can read it and really have no idea what you're reading or why it even matters. So it's adding some context to explore these thoughts a little bit deeper. Why does it matter that our rights come from a creator, a divine creator, from God and not from government? Why does that really matter? Well, that would be a very great thing for every student to explore. And the better we understood this, actually, the better we would want to have checks and balances of our government. The more we'd want to say, you know what, I don't think we want them doing that, where you can go back to, I think Jefferson and Lincoln both are attributed with saying that the government should only do for us what we cannot do for ourselves. And unfortunately, we have relied on the government to do way more than we should. And part of it's been because of ignorance. So these civics education bills helps bring education back by starting with the next generation of leaders and saying, guys, just important things to understand. Our rights don't come from government. They come from God, and showing the framework where those ideas came from. But we also have been testifying on things like 10 Commandments bills, where if you go through the history of education in our nation, the Pilgrims are the ones that started the very first public schools in America, 1647. The reason they started it was they wanted to make sure their kids could read so they could know the Bible. The very first education law that was passed was known as the Old Deluder Satan Law, was passed in 1647. And literally, what they're explaining is the Bible used to be in a language that we didn't speak Latin. And once the Bible became available in English, we were able to know what the Word of God says. But if we don't teach our kids to read, they'll never be able to read the Bible. And then we will lose all of these things we've been learning. We have to make sure our kids can read so they can know the Bible. This is literally the law is schools started so kids would know the Bible. As you go forward, the very first textbook that was passed in 1990, it was a New England Primer. And in the New England Primer, it is profoundly religious content because it was aiding and helping kids learn what the Bible was all about. At the very end of the New England Primer, and the New England Primer is a very small, thin book. It's like 3 inches by 4 inches, and it's, not even half an inch thick. It's a very small, thin book. But at the end of the New England Primer, there was more than 100 questions on faith and theology taken from Westminster Shorter Catechism. Of those questions, 43 of them dealt with the 10 Commandments. And the reason, we'll lay this out for these state legislatures, we want to show them there's a long-standing history and tradition. So you start with the Pilgrims, 1690, first textbook. We can come forward where the New England Primer was actually first printed in 1690, but it was used all the way to the early 1900s in America. The Founding Fathers reprinted the New England Primer for use in their own schools, for their own students, for their kids to learn from. When Noah Webster does an American history book, his history book literally starts off, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And he goes through, at the back of his history book, he tells the students something they all need to memorize, and then he lists the 10 Commandments. So literally, our history book started with the idea there was a God, which matters because if there's a God, you can connect it to there's God-given rights, and then you can reduce the role of government to protecting what those God-given rights are, because that's actually what the role of government, according to the Founding Fathers, that was their main idea about this. And so what we do is we teach the historic side of this, because the current position from the U.S. Supreme Court is if there's longstanding history and tradition, there should be a presumption of constitutionality, meaning if there's something we've always done in America, it's probably okay, right? Like if the Founding Fathers did it, it's probably okay for us to do. So we're able to show that, they use the Bible in schools. They promoted the 10 Commandments. Every kid should memorize and learn the 10 Commandments. And part of why they did this, just from a practical standpoint, is the Founding Fathers believed in freedom. And there might be some today that would say, yeah, but if you're like promoting or forcing religion, that's not really freedom. No. You're misunderstanding the thought behind this. No civilization, no society can function without a moral code. So it's not a matter, and even in schools today, it's not a matter of do we have morals in school? It's only a matter of what morals are we promoting. If we're promoting the morals, that every kid determines truth for themselves. If we think about this sincerely for about 5 seconds, we realize, that's probably not a great way to do it, because if a kid sincerely believes that he should get a gun and shoot all his classmates, who are we to say he's wrong? That position's never going to work for every student to decide for themselves. And you might say, of course that's wrong. Well, how do you know it's wrong? Right? Like, what standard are you using to say it's wrong? And this is where, for the Founding Fathers, universally, they agreed the Bible and the 10 Commandments were the best moral standards that every kid should learn from. And this is where the Founding Fathers said that religion and morality had to be the foundation, where George Washington in his farewell address said that religion and morality are the indispensable supports of our political prosperity. That America could not politically prosper if we didn't have religion and morality. And by religion, he was talking about Christianity. By morality, he was talking about the Bible. It's because this was the moral code that allowed freedom to function. John Adams, very famously in 1798, wrote a letter to the militia of Massachusetts. It's only like 5 paragraphs. It's a super easy read, but it's incredibly profound, where he says that our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any others. Again, why would he say this? What's he talking about? The American idea was giving freedom to people, but freedom only works if you have a moral and a religious people. If you give freedom to immoral people, all that's going to happen is immoral things, and it's not going to work. It's the reason why if we go to so many convenience stores, grocery stores today, you're going to find entire cabinets where all these goods are behind locked glass. Well, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough to remember when nothing was behind locked glass. Everything was there. Even guns, you used to be able to pick up and look at an ammunition. Like, it's crazy now that we are putting everything behind locked glass. Why? Because we no longer have the same moral values. And if you don't have the moral values, freedom just doesn't work very well. If we're going to restore freedom, we have to restore moral values. And this is part of what we do from a historic standpoint, and show here's what we used to do to teach and promote moral values. And by the way, you could even argue that this is even bigger than moral values, because the entire legal system of America was built on the Bible and the 10 Commandments. Every single one of the 10 Commandments was enshrined into legal code in all 13 of the original colonies. So even if you just want to talk about from a historic standpoint, the value add of what the Ten Commandments was, even from our legal structure being set up, it was set up according to the Bible and Ten Commandments. So we will go in, and whether it's the Bible in schools or chaplain bills or school release time where students can go and learn about the Bible, I mean, whatever it is, what we are doing is testifying on the history and tradition, because the Supreme Court says that there's longstanding history and tradition, there should be a presumption of constitutionality. So we're helping these legislators know, if you're restoring, for example, the Ten Commandments were used in education from the Pilgrims until 1980. That's a pretty stinking long-standing history and tradition. So to restore something that has that much history and tradition, this is not somebody being like crazy Christian nationalist. No. This is going back to the way it was under Harry Truman and FDR and Dwight Eisenhower and Woodrow Wilson. I mean, you pick any president in American history up until 1980, right? The Ten Commandments were part of public education. It wasn't some crazy right-wing Christian conspiracy theory. We are talking about returning a moral code and moral foundation and the basis of our legal structure and legal system. And kids probably ought to know this is where it came from. Again, so that's part of what we do. There's a lot of bills we're asked to testify on. And if it's related to something that has a history and tradition in America, we will often go and testify on the history and tradition of whatever that was, helping give context and understanding for those legislators to be able to make an informed decision about, is this constitutional? What is the history and tradition of this bill?
So much there that I could respond to. Thank you so much, Tim, for all of that information. I think, though, what you were getting at, it reminded me of that famous quote from Abraham Lincoln that the philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the government in the next. And I think you can replace philosophy with moral values as well. What moral values are in the schoolroom will be the moral values that guide the governing officials in the future. And so that is why this is so incredibly important, what you're doing, what Convention of States is doing. And so, folks, I would encourage you, go to wallbuilders.com, check out, follow Tim and David, follow them on their journey. If you're in Arkansas or if you're in one of these states that is considering this legislation, look into it and contact your legislator and let them know that you support this kind of effort. You also want to get involved with Convention of States. Go to conventionofstates.com, sign up to become a volunteer. Go to conventionofstates.com/act. Get involved with your state team. We're doing this as well with other types of legislation that promote freedom, federalism, and fundamental rights. And you need to be involved in this because we want to make sure that we are preserving our nation for posterity. And the way to do that is through how we are educating the next generation. Tim, this has been a great conversation, and I thank you for everything. I have one last question for you, sir. As you may be aware, your home state of Texas passed the COS resolution back in 2017, becoming state number 11 to pass our application. However, there was an expiration date that was attached to that resolution back then. And at the time of this recording, the expiration, by the way, is May 4th of this year. At the time of this recording, we're awaiting a vote from the House Committee on State Affairs on the clean resolution, which would effectively remove the expiration date. There are still some members of the legislature in Texas that are on the fence and not too sure if they want to support utilizing Article 5 or calling an Article 5 convention. What message would you have to Texas legislators or any legislator in the country that remains undecided on this issue?
Yeah, I mean, I would encourage them, first of all, go back and read the Constitution, right? It's one thing to say as a conservative, we want to conserve things, but you have to ask, what are we trying to conserve? And if we're not trying to conserve constitutional things, then I would question how conservative are we? And clearly, Article 5 is part of the Constitution, part of the amendment process. And then if the question and the concern for many people is, but I don't think we're moral enough, I don't think we're good enough. Well, that might be a different conversation, right? Of what do we need to do? But two things can be true at once. It can be true that we have to return and restore some of the religious and moral foundation in our nation. It can be true that we have a Congress that has lost a lot of backbone that need a infusion of backbone, or we need another option. And it's true that Article 5 is part of the Constitution. So if you are a conservative, then again, multiple things can be true at once, but what are you trying to conserve? And if the Constitution is not part of what you're trying to conserve, then again, I would have to question how conservative you actually are. With that being said, we are at a place at Wall Builders that we believe multiple things are true at once. That Article 5, a valid part of the Constitution. And so you can't say, I believe in the Constitution and oppose the Constitution. That seems very intellectually dishonest and inconsistent. But we also recognize, man, we got a lot of problems in our nation, right? So let's walk and chew gum. Let's do several things at once. And let's work to restore the basic moral, foundational, and constitutional values and principles that are eroding and under attack in our society today.
Perfectly stated. Tim, this has been a masterclass. We have to make sure, Producer G, make sure you write this down. We can't go 3 years again without having you come back on the program, because there's so much that has been left unsaid, but a ton that has been educational to everyone. So, Tim, thank you so much for everything that you and David are doing with Wall Builders. Again, folks, check out wallbuilders.com. Is there any way that folks can follow you more closely, Tim?
I mean, yeah, I'm all over social media. We are doing social media posts virtually every day. We have a YouTube channel, but you can go to wallbuilders.com. All of it will have links there. And you can find us anywhere on social media. We'd love to stay in touch. And you guys can see what's going on. You can follow. And then there are times we ask for people to pray, support, whatever else. And so you can see what's going on. Wallbuilders.com is the best place to start.
Thank you so much, Tim. We really appreciate it. God bless you and David. Safe travels tomorrow, and good luck in the next legislative battle that you are doing. We appreciate you so much. God bless.
My pleasure. Thanks so much.
What a great conversation. And Wall Builders is a great organization. Both David and Tim Barton, tremendous supporters of Convention of States. But what I love about them is not only are they doing everything they can to educate people on our history and the moral values that led to the Constitution and led to the establishment of our nation, but they're actually going out there working with these state legislatures to try and advance this important legislation. And God bless them. We're so glad that we have supporters like them. All right, let's go ahead and move to action at home. So as I mentioned before, tonight we are going to review a new opportunity to take action while you're watching the program from the comfort of your own home. And it's going to be something that you can help us with right now that can make an impact in Montana and some other states that are still considering our resolution. We are now introducing the new Social Media Warrior Call to Action page. It's important to note that this is open to anyone with a COS account. Okay, you don't necessarily have to have a role, but you do have to have an account. You can go to the page and walk through exactly how you create one. It's free, simple to do. You can use your email, or you can sign up through your Facebook or X account. So if you're on Facebook or X, you can find the daily activity Monday through Friday at 10 a.m. Eastern or later. And the website is conventionofstates.com/social. Okay, so that's the page that Producer G has up on the screen right now. More will be coming about exciting changes to this program, but that shouldn't stop you from participating in today's action from home to help us toward victory. This is an exciting time of year, and we can get legislators' attention on these platforms. So let's go ahead and take a look at today's mission. And Producer G's got it right up on the screen. Wednesday, April 2nd, urgent. Today's mission is extremely important because we are headed to a floor vote in the Montana House of Representatives on Thursday. That is tomorrow. And we need to secure several more votes in order to pass. Please add positive comments to and or share this post on Facebook and on X. After the post starts getting engagement, our state leaders in Montana and Iowa and some other states as well will tag key legislators in the post. So the goal is to push some on-the-fence legislators in Montana over to our side so that we can achieve a chamber victory before time runs out this session. The strategy is to get these target legislators to view the material highlighted in the post to influence their thinking about COS. The mission: generate as many positive comments and reactions to this post as possible before our Montana state leaders tag our Montana grassroots state leaders, tag the target legislators, and get them to view the post and video. So your action as a social media warrior is to please add positive comments and share this post on Facebook and on X. So Producer G's got it up there, and you can see the post from today. And today's mission as I mentioned, like, comment, share the post. It's very easy. And the reason that we want you to do this is because it shows that a particular post has a lot of positive engagement, a lot of good engagement, and this helps the post reach more people, right? It's how the algorithms are set up on social media. So always a simple rule of thumb, the more engagement, the more people are looking at this, the more they're reacting and commenting, the more Facebook and X will start to share that with other people because they're saying, hey, this is something that a lot of people are paying attention to and they're reacting to and engaging with. You may want to as well. So we want to try to get that ton of support behind those posts. Volunteers from specific states will also be tagging on the fence legislators. As I just mentioned, in Montana, we've got grassroots activists that are waiting to target particular legislators and share these posts with them by sharing the link or posting or tagging them in the post itself. So it's always going to be an educational post about Article 5 and COS. And this is showing the legislators not only good information, but also that these posts have a large base of support for COS. There are lots of citizens across the nation that want them to vote yes for COS so that we can rein in the federal government and unleash liberty and prosperity in America for generations to come. So this is a very simple and easy thing for you to do. Producer G has been walking you through exactly how to do that, and he's sharing a post right now. You can go ahead and do this too. You can go to conventionofstates.com/social to see the specific mission. Again, it's going to be every day around 10 a.m. Eastern is when this is going to be updated. You'll log in, click on that link, and leave a positive comment, and then share it if you can as well. And if you've got social media accounts, you can already go ahead and take a look at some of the posts that we posted the last couple of days. There are many different posts that we have up there. So if you want the specific ones that we're going to be sharing, make sure you go to conventionofstates.com/social and follow along. Thank you very much for helping us with this important movement that we're trying to accomplish. Now, let's go ahead and check the Minutemen mailbag. All right, tonight we've got another great question in the mailbag, and this one is from Michael Brand. Michael asks, why in the world would the legislators in Texas or any other state agree to a sunset clause in the first place? Well, it's a great question, Michael, and I thank you for writing in. And I think we all understand the methodologies about why a sunset clause or an expiration date could be practical when passing various types of legislation. And I think when Michael wrote in to us, he was specifically referring to an expiration date for the COS resolution, right? Not other types of legislation. And Michael, primarily a sunset clause may be used as a tool to help legislators that are hesitant to completely come out and support our resolution and then ultimately vote in favor of the resolution, right? So some legislators, I think, may feel that they don't want to see a resolution or an application for an Article 5 convention sitting and waiting for a convention to be called for years and years. So they may warm up to the idea that an application is only on the books for a limited amount of time. Of course, we prefer to avoid these shackles placed on the resolution because we know it takes time to advance the legislation through 34 states, right? We've been at this for a number of years now. We've got 19 states. We're knocking on the door in many other states, but it does take time. It's not something that's done overnight. So, however, having a state that passes our resolution, even with a sunset clause, can help the overall movement, right? If we have more states and we're getting closer and closer, then other states that see the growth that we have experienced will maybe feel more comfortable about throwing their hat in the ring and getting behind the movement. We've also been very, very successful in removing expiration dates in states where we have had them. Oklahoma and Missouri have both successfully removed their sunset clauses, and Nebraska and Texas, who we were just talking about earlier, both have active legislation addressing their expiration dates this legislative session. So we're not afraid of using this tool. We prefer not to, Michael, but sometimes it is the politically expedient thing for us to do in order for us to get across the finish line in some of these states. But a really great question. I appreciate you so much for writing in, Michael. Thank you so much. And if you'd like to submit a question to the Minutemen mailbag, you can do so by visiting conventionofstates.com/mailbag. Okay, let's move to COS Voices. Okay, so in the past, during this segment, we typically hear from activists as they answer one of the top questions that we receive at Convention of States, which is, how can I effectively communicate the COS message quickly when I'm out and about, talking with people, maybe riding an elevator? How can I get the message across quickly? But over the last couple of programs, we have been focusing on a bit of a legislative theme, and we wanted to share with you how some of our activists effectively communicate the COS message during a committee hearing and are under the pressure, if you will, or a time limit when talking to their legislators that are considering the resolution. So tonight we've got some great testimony from another one of our activists, Bob Straughter, the longtime grassroots coordinator for COS Kansas, and he is sharing his COS story.
While at a fuel stop, there were some men hanging around complaining about the government, and one of them said something like, how much longer do you think people will put up with this before we have another civil war? The only time in recorded history that a war of this type has ever reduced the size of government was our American Revolution. War is not the answer. I realized it was time for me to get more involved. I Googled Article 5 Convention and found Convention of States Project. And I wondered why we haven't already done this. The U.S. Constitution, and especially Article 5, make it clear that the states are to be in charge.
Another great testimony there from Bob. Thank you for doing that, Bob, and all of the hard work that you've put into COS Kansas over the years. This is just another demonstration of our activists and how they are so well prepared when it comes to these committee hearings. They prepare, they take the time to understand what it is that they need to communicate and how to do it quickly. And it's also important to note that sometimes taking the opportunity to tell your personal story about why you are a COS supporter can be an extremely effective method for sharing Convention of States with others, as opposed to focusing on addressing some of the issues that come up. Sometimes just telling that personal story. We've had many activists that have been at this a long time. We have many other veterans that are supportive of Convention of States, and sharing those stories can really resonate with some legislators. So well done, Bob, and thank you for all that you have done for COS in Kansas. All right, folks, we have reached the bottom of the program. So just a reminder that all COS at Home shows are aired live on the first Wednesday of every month at 8 o'clock Eastern time. The next show is going to be on Wednesday, May 7th at 8 o'clock Eastern. And we are going to be joined by the host of the Speakeasy podcast and author of Confessions of a Crappy Christian, Blake Guichet, also known as The Girl Named Blake. Blake had an opportunity to sit down with Mark Meckler, and he appeared on her podcast, and it was just a wonderful conversation, and we wanted to return the favor by having her come on and share her story and talk with all of you about why she supports Convention of States. So hope you'll join us for that conversation Wednesday, May 7th at 8 o'clock Eastern time. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, this has been a ton of fun to be here with all of you and talking about so many great things that are happening in our wonderful country. I hope you've enjoyed the show and that it's been helpful to you. Thanks again to our friend, President of Wall Builders, Tim Barton, for joining us tonight, or really taking the time to record since he was on the road today. We appreciate him doing that. Also, a big thanks to the legend, Producer G, for all of his hard work behind the scenes, cutting up all these various different clips that we share with you. It's an incredible program and polished because of all of his hard work. So thank you, Producer G. But the greatest thanks, as I mentioned every time, goes to all of you folks for everything that you do to continue your support for Convention of States and the Article 5 movement. It's important to remember, as I always say, despite all of the problems that we currently face as a nation, you and I, we the people, are the solution. So thank you again for everything that you do, all of your support. God bless you, and have a wonderful evening.